Hello and welcome to our first episode of Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield. I am the Medical Global Business Line Leader here at Intertech. I've been with Intertech for almost 15 years, working primarily with our large and mid-sized medical device manufacturers. And I'm very excited today to be joined by Mike Rousseau, who is one of our regional chief engineers for our medical business. Mike has been with Intertech for, 30 years now. Almost
27.
27. Okay. I won't push you too far. So 27 years here with Intertech. So Mike has seen everything, many different types of medical products and challenges and issues throughout the years. And he's also been quite involved as we've seen changes from the standard, as well as, changes in the requirements that we see that are applicable to medical devices. So today, to kick us off, we really wanted to look at one of the biggest areas of challenge that we see, which exists within the risk management file and the risk assessment. So, over the last 5-10 years, we've seen this big shift within our industry, moving from a traditional testing standard to a more risk-based approach. So, Mike, can you talk a little bit about with me, how this has evolved over the last few years, moving the standard from a traditional test standard to this risk-based approach that we see, and how that's important when you're trying to launch a medical device?
Yes, when we first started doing this way back in the day, it was just literally you drop the product off and you did electrical and mechanical tests. And there was some manual requirement, but that was really it. And it was very much black and white. You passed, you failed, and there was really not much wiggle room. With the advent of risk management, it has allowed us to really look at, does the product, is it safe? Is it effective? Maybe I can't meet a particular part of a standard, but through risk management, I'm able to show that the benefits outweigh the risk. And with that, you're able to build much better products. I think better products in general. I think products today in the medical space with risk management are better and safer than they were probably 20 years ago.
Yeah, and when you look at it, as a medical device manufacturer, so with that risk analysis and risk management portion, that onus then is on the manufacturer to provide that information. And then a test house such as ourselves would be the ones to review and help to evaluate that kind of documentation package, correct?
Yes, and it's also made us much more collaborative. Like I said, in the old days, you just dropped the product off in a couple of weeks. You found out if you passed or failed. But the advent of risk management has really pushed the manufacturer and the test labs to really kind of partner up a little more, because there's much more give and take because of that risk management. We have to understand the product. We have to understand really the kind of the quality system a little more than we did in the past. And because of that, it's a much more collaborative type of effort than the traditional old days. Let's just drop it off and in a couple of weeks, I find out if I pass or fail.
I see. Totally. And then, with this whole risk management file evaluation and the risk-based approach, a lot of what we see centers around questions with this ISO 14971 standard and how it's applied. And one of the most common questions we see is, when we're doing an evaluation, sometimes you'll see a 2007 version of the standard. Sometimes you'll see more recent versions of the standard. So how do we choose with something like the ISO 14971? Maybe you can explain, what that standard is and how we might choose one version versus another.
Yeah, the ISO 14971 is really, it's the procedure on how you get risk management. It kind of is the guide. I'd call it like a guidance document. But really the difference in versions is the 2007 is really called out by the 601 3.1 version, as a lot of people call it, or Amendment 1 of the standard. Whereas now the 2019 version, which is what all of the if you go into Europe right now and you're trying to pass, your notified body is more than likely going to say you got to be to the latest and greatest state-of-the-art standard, which is going to pull into 2019. The good news there is that the new amendment of the standard for 3.2, so now we're up to the Amendment 2 of the 601 standard, is calling out 2019. So it's really what it's done is it's in the past, it was like you had 3 years to kind of meet the new standard. And it's been accelerated a lot by MDR and the like, where right now they say, no, we want state of the art. We don't really care. We're not going to give you 3 years. So it is creating I think a little heartache for a lot of clients who like they weren't ready, but now they got to kind of scramble a little bit to get to that 2019 and get to Amendment 2. But at the end of the day, there wasn't a ton different other than that. So it's not like they're having to redo everything like we did when we went from second to third. That was that titanic shift of, oh my gosh, what do you mean you're going to look at my risk management?
Yeah, right. So you may see with your risk management file and with this ISO 14971 specifically, that you could have the 2007 version harmonized with your third edition Amendment 1. And then you may also need to move to the 2019 version with Amendment 2. And there may be some combination of the two right now, just depending on where you're trying to go geographically. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, I mean we're in that tricky time again where you have some countries want Amendment 2, some countries probably still only going to accept Amendment 1, and there's still China that's looking at second edition, right? So you're kind of all over the map a little bit. I think you're going to see more people readily adopt Amendment 2, just because it's not that titanic shift, like I said, that it was before. Like, oh my God, we're doing risk management. It's really bringing things up to a more of a state-of-the-art type of standard. It also brings in 62366-1, which is also a little different. But again, it's not like it's these big chunk changes. And I think the fact that we're seeing a lot of the notified bodies already telling clients they have to meet the Amendment 2, and clients are like, they just came out, and it's like, state-of-the-art standard, you have to meet it. So the MDR, I think a lot of the notified bodies are really pushing state-of-the-art.
Yeah, and so when we see this third edition Amendment 1, third edition Amendment 2, it's really the standards committees, right, taking the feedback from manufacturers, from test houses, pulling that all together and updating and making things, as you say, right, more state-of-the-art, incorporating what's going on with technology. And that's why we see these kind of recent amendments post the third edition Amendment 1 and now Amendment 2 to address some of those things, right?
Yes, and it's also, I mean, no standard is perfect when it comes out. And I think the fact that they're doing amendments kind of help fix some of the things that were obvious that were probably not really fair. I think things went in 3.0 of the version that once it hit some of the manufacturers, are like, I didn't even know how they were going to meet it, and now so they have to meet something. And so, when you're on a committee, it is manufacturers as well as test house. So it's not like it's the testing organizations who are there saying you shall. Manufacturers have every bit as much, and in some ways, almost more say in some of how these standards are written, because it is their technology. They understand it. That is especially true when you start getting into Part 2 type standards.
Yeah.
But
so
yeah, it was just
feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Feedback is definitely taken and liked, actually.
Awesome. So then along with that, we have questions and kind of confusion surrounding which parts of the risk management file are process specific versus which parts are product specific, because I know we work with, many people that make more than one product or maybe have variations in their risk management file. So can you speak a little bit to what might be considered process specific and what might be considered product specific?
Yeah, so that's what ISO 14971 is kind of broken up. Half of it is kind of really the processes and how do you determine risk. Every client's going to be a little different, and that's where third edition kind of came in, and it was a little trickier because you can have a client who, for lack of a better word, is a little more conservative when it comes to risk. So they may look at something that's too risky for me as a company. I don't feel signing it off. Where you may have another company who is perfectly fine with that. So the risk management is a little different in that aspect. So you do have and that's the part that's more of like, hey, this is all the process. This is how we determined our risk. This is all the different sections of risk. This is who's in our group, who's determining risk. A lot of the processes is like who's on their team. Mm-hmm. I mean, a team could have everybody from, all engineers to a lot more and more teams we're seeing where they're bringing in, they usually bring in nurses, doctors, lay people, and they have lay people as part of it who don't know anything about standards. Because a lot of times they can give you the best feedback due to the fact that they don't know standards. And then once you get through all that part, then it flips over into the, we're going to start talking about like the very specific, requirements for this product. And a lot of times when we see that in ISO 14971, it's like, here's this one document and it kind of shoots off to like 17 other documents. That is really how we find it. And that's why a lot of the test labs, we use checklists, and a checklist for us it's basically a roadmap into your quality management. Thousands of pages long is some quality docs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we'll get some that if we didn't have really the roadmap, I don't know how we would ever we could get through it. It would just be like, it'd take us 8 months to get a fairly simple project through, whereas we could do it in days. So I mean, that is one of the trickier things with the standard, is that we see this thing and we send it this checklist out, and when I send it out to a client, I usually try to tell them they should sit down first. So when they look at it, because they look at how long it is and how it is,
Yeah.
but once you start explaining why we're doing what we're doing, well, they don't want us poking in around different areas that they don't want us in either. So that's again where that collaboration comes into effect.
Yeah. So maybe just a little bit to expand on that with the checklist, right? So as you said, people like us, like other test houses, we send out these checklists to provide that roadmap, that guidance, to show them, exactly what we need to collect from a manufacturer. Are there any tips and tricks or things that we would recommend when someone's trying to fill out those checklists, right? You say sit down first. Do you think it's a start filling it out and then have a conversation with the engineer or the test house that you're working with? Is it a be really specific, be really vague, be really broad? Like what would you recommend as some of the kind of tips and tricks when you're completing those risk management file checklists to support that evaluation?
The first thing I always say to people, if they're not really sure, ask the test house right away. I'm sure a lot of people have, it's not like they're doing this every day, but I've had many clients where I've watched go down the path and it was a path they didn't have, and they spent a lot of time, and you feel bad because it's a lot of time and energy that nobody has, right? Everybody is, especially nowadays, is really booked up and really having a thing. So my usual thing is, if you have any questions right up, or especially if it's your first time through and you've never done it, it is definitely like set some time, go at the test lab. A lot of times it's not even like it's not like you have to pay for tons of hours. It's an hour or two conversation to just understand how I have to fill this out. And then once they start learning what that's all they have to do. And it's like, yeah. And then it's like, and they get to another section that doesn't apply to them at all. And it's almost like they try to shoehorn a risk management in there. And it's like, well, no, you're not permanently connected. So you don't have to have a risk management for permanently connected equipment because that's not you. And you can say NA and say, we don't have this. But a lot of times you see people, they want to write this whole long risk assessment for something that never applied to them, or they're just writing up a whole bunch of stuff that's there. And then the second half of that, though, is to be specific. Like if it's, let's face it, most of our files come in big Excel blocks and it's, thousands of lines. So if you know what section, you don't have to say it's on line, 1,000. You can just say, hey, it's in section 4.1. Then I know, okay, go to 4.1, and then we can read it and then decide if you meet the standard. If you don't meet the standard, it's risk management. The only good thing is I call them soft failures. It's not usually the end of the world. It can be fixed. Unlike, if you had a test failure that requires you to remove a power supply and put a new power supply, that's kind of more of a hard failure. But when you start talking about these soft failures, it's really paperwork. I'm not ever saying it's easy and it's,
No, we wouldn't say that.
No one will ever say it. It's easier for those type of failures, though, it's always funny because it's always easier when it's those type of failures for a smaller startup, because, they'll just write it up the night before. One of the guys will sign it and they send it in. Whereas you get a really big company and they might have to have 10 signatures before it can come back.
Make that kind of change. Yeah.
So it does change.
Yeah. So it sounds like, some of the things you'd recommend starting early, right? It sounds like that's always a good piece of advice, right? Getting started on putting together that information early on, collaborating and working with whoever your test house is or engineer is who's working on it to make sure you're on the right track, putting together the information in the correct way. And then obviously being specific as to where you want someone to look when you are identifying how you're mitigating a clause or how you're mitigating risk, right? Is pointing them exactly to where you think someone should look as specifically as you can without getting down into putting the words or the exact line number.
Exactly. And And the nice thing with risk management is you don't have to wait to the end. A lot of times we have to wait, and you have to have all your right product to kind of get into the testing house to be able to start testing, right? You need the latest product, the one that you're going to sell. But risk management, I mean, it's speaking for myself, I mean, it's great if we can get that early. I mean, they can be broken up and you can have your hope, because if there is a failure, like I said, it's not like it's the end of the world type of nonconformance, but it is the type of thing that still takes time to fix.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times clients will come in and they'll do all their risk management first, and they don't even have a product ready. But as long as they can get through all the paperwork, maybe they'll have us look at their manuals, because a lot of times manuals and markings aren't like that. All kind of fills in to me part of that risk management. But that's all the kind of things that just take some extra time to fix. A marking label can take 6 weeks if you're having somebody make it. So it's better to find that up early than, like how we usually get it is it's run late, it's at the end. And, the kind of the joke with clients when I'm with them, I'm like, so do you need this last week or the week before?
Exactly. Right.
And that's typically, and they're like, no, like 2 months ago. Right. So, and that's when things get a little harder. But so you can push a lot of this paperworky type of evaluation to the beginning, so that you're not waiting, so that by the time you do, especially today, in today's world with the supply chain issues, I mean, a lot of times we're not getting products until it's done. So right now would probably be the right time to do risk management early, and then do the testing when products come in, when you get your stuff from the supply chain.
Yeah. And I picked up on one thing that you said too, right? Which is that we oftentimes see a lot of soft nonconformances, as you say, right? So not non-compliances or things that would warrant additional rework, but things that, there's additional information that's maybe missing, or documents that need to be created. So by doing that kind of on the front end in that preparation stage, then you have all of that time to go back, address any of those nonconformances, pull together additional data and information that you need. So when your product is ready to test, you're kind of getting closer to that phase of having a complete risk management file, it sounds like.
Definitely. And like I said, and sometimes when we ask questions back, we just might have missed it. I mean, a typo, somebody, and I'm in section 4.2 and you meant 4.3. Right. I look at it and it just looks funny, because I just don't understand where this doesn't seem to answer the question. So that's that collaboration and that give and take that we just work. There's been many times I've sent something back and it goes, and even the guy goes, I don't know.
Yeah, well, we're trying to, yeah.
I don't know it was 11:30 at night when I was trying to get this done for you, right? Because I understand that a lot of people work their hours too to get this in, and it was just missed. And it's like, okay, missed, boom, boom, we fix it within 30 seconds. So sometimes those quote unquote soft failures become real easy because it was just a wrong section that was called out.
Yeah. So then it sounds too like a lot of this will become kind of living, breathing documents that are getting updated as, a manufacturer changes their processes and procedures or makes improvements. There may be things that change within the risk management file as time goes along.
The risk management file, I mean, we understand now, and that's usually the first thing I have to teach junior engineers, is a risk management file is a living document. Risk management files typically still are being changed after you stop building a product.
Right.
It's still being worked on. So a lot of times when we do our products, what we'll do is, if you get a report, a lot of times we'll show, hey, this is the revision that we looked at. And that's just so that if something changes down the line, it's a way of tracking. But no, risk management is absolutely a living document that is constantly changing, because as feedback, after you start shipping, as feedback comes back from the field, is something that may have nothing to do with the standard, but also you need to change. It could be a user feedback that is not safety related, but maybe they need to change something because you're getting complaints because you have to touch too many things. It's more of an ergonomic type of thing.
Oh, looking at continuous improvements, right?
Yeah. And we know software, for instance, anyone who has a phone knows that you get a software update every
daily.
couple of months. Yeah, so
right?
it's the same. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. Like people's software is always evolving and they're always fixing bugs. So that risk management file is always a living document.
Understood. Well, I could talk about risk management forever, but I do want to shift to our last kind of question that I wanted to talk a little bit about today. And it's something that I think, causes a lot of confusion for manufacturers. And especially when we saw the shift to the new versions of the standard, is this whole idea of essential performance, right? What is essential performance? What is it? What does that mean when you're identifying as the manufacturer what your essential performance is, and how do we look at that as part of, what we do as a third-party test house?
Yes, essential performance, our favorite topic, actually.
Right? Everyone wants to talk about essential performance.
I think the key is, I mean, if you boil it down to, I guess the old Reader's Digest version is, does it do exactly what you say it's doing? So does your product perform exactly the way you say? Does it perform also within the parameters that are your requirements? It was always kind of funny because early on when I had this, I had a client who came in with a laser, and I failed them. I failed their product because they were outside of the tolerances. Now it met the standard, and initially one of their guys, like, he was kind of angry because he's like, the project manager was angry because I was failing him, but when he read the standard, it passed. And it was his own quality guy internally. He goes, yeah, but we said this is our percentage, and it's outside of what we said that percentage would be. So yes, it is a failure. So that's the trickier thing when you start talking about essential performance is you could technically meet the standard, but because of how you write your documentation and what you're claiming, if you fall outside of those requirements, that is a failure. And that's where alarms come in, because you can, a lot of times if you fall outside of your tolerances, you should have an alarm to tell somebody that something's outside of there. What people really get confused more is really they call essential performance basic safety. So a lot of times we'll do a test and they say, well, it passed leaks and dielectrics. I'm like, well, that's basic
It's a little
safety.
bit different, yeah.
That's not risk management, and that's not your essential performance. But I've always kind of, like I said, I've always kind of boiled it down to the simplest terms of, does your product do exactly what you say it's going to do within the parameters that you have set as a company?
Right, is what your acceptable risk tolerance is, right? So as a manufacturer, you look at, okay, what are we willing to accept as a risk, right? Is this going to risk patient safety, operator safety, what that might be? And then you identify your essential performance kind of based off on that, correct?
Yes. And that was kind of a tricky thing at the beginning. You had some clients who were like, hey, how come these guys passed?
And we didn't.
We didn't. They did. And a lot of times it'd be like, well, because everybody, it'd be like, well, you can only say, look at your tolerances, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, one's a 5% and you're like 2%. Well, he can be at 4.5% and still pass. And if you're at 3%, you failed.
Yeah.
Right. So it is one of those things where, that can be a key on whether or not you pass your standard. It's your essential performance of that. And having that.
Oh, I think one of the things we see too, right, is now there's some of those Part 2 standards, those specific standards that also will have some identifications for essential performance in some cases, correct?
A lot of this, especially a lot of the newer standards, have some kind of essential performance. And that's a lot of times when clients don't know what to do for essential performance and they have a Part 2, a lot of times they can default to those Part 2s to give them their essential performance. Mm-hmm. We also use it for tweener devices that don't really fit into a Part 2 and don't really have a home. But a lot of times as clients go, so I'd like to pull sections of this standard because it's a published standard and it makes sense to use. So that you can use those to help you set up your essential performance. But the essential performance, all the Part 2s, especially if you're talking anything in the patient monitoring world, they're very specific on what tests you'll have to pass. And matter of fact, the performance testing can be very extensive in a lot of Part 2 standards. Some are easier, and then some are very, very laborious and take several weeks to finish. But, at the end of the day, it's to make a safe product.
Yeah. So I think we see now too, right? Essential performance is being considered within safety, but also within EMC, right? We see that a lot now being called in as well, right? Looking at the essential performance of the device as it relates to EMC, as well as how it relates to safety, right?
Yeah, and that was the big shift for the 4th edition of EMC, is where they said that having essential performance has always been, it's been in the standard since the 2nd edition, but it was never really enforced. Whereas when 4th edition came out, it was, you shall have a test plan, you'll monitor essential performance, and they want to make sure that the essential performance does not fall out of the range during EMC, which is really good, because EMC is one of those, as we also call it black magic. But it is one of those things where you could get these really soft failures or really hard failures and nobody really knows them. Right? It's really easy if something, all of a sudden, immediately catches on fire. That's easy to know it
easy to
fails,
identify,
right? But when you have something that's an EMC that has some kind of ESD or some kind of effect, and now nobody really knows what's going on, but all of a sudden you've fallen out of a tolerance for a little while, it could be pretty rough especially for a drug delivery device or something like that. It could be the difference between somebody, surviving and dying, right?
Yeah, and I think so much of this we can really draw back to, right? We've seen such advances in medical technology over the last 5, 10, 15 years, right? And so with the advances in technology, we've then seen this move to a risk-based approach, understanding that devices are, as they become more advanced, there are some cases where they're inherently more risky, maybe by design, but also just because of what we're able to do with medical technology. So I think we're seeing that kind of more and more as an overall trend, and why we see these standards developing to state of the art and incorporating risk management, and we'll likely continue to see changes as we move forward.
Oh, definitely. I mean, from being in the field as long as I have, the last, I'd say 5 years, the type of equipment we're seeing is exciting, right? It's challenging it's challenging for both us and the manufacturer. As I said, a lot of times it's, how do we even apply the standard to this widget that somebody built? And you're like, my gosh, this is so far ahead of where the standard is even today, that I think if we didn't have risk management, we'd be in a lot of trouble. That's what the risk management, I think, allows us to do. Is standards are almost, most standards is by the time they're published, they're already obsolete.
Yeah.
But the advent of risk management and the essential performance and everything within the third edition has allowed us to be able to have state-of-the-art products, and kind of, even as a standard maybe, excuse me, isn't all the way up to date, we're still able to actually keep up with the standard. So I think that's part of the best part of the new standard.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, I'd like to thank you so much for being my first guest on Medical Compliance with Clarissa. Really appreciate your time. Great discussion today. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. If you have questions, you can feel free to email me at clarissa.benfield@intertech.com. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.